Hi, this is Emma again, and this is going to be part 2 of our discussion on AP Language and Composition, the persuasive essay. And if you remember our last video, we went over some basic things to keep in mind when going into a persuasive essay. We went over challenging, defending, qualifying, and evidence, and looked at some prompts. And today we're going to be going into a more specific prompt. Here is the prompt for today. We're going to be breaking it down. I'll annotate how I annotated on my actual essay and kind of explain what's going through my mind and show you an outline of the essay that I would write. So if you want to pause now and take a look at this prompt and annotate it yourself and write your own outline, that would be a wonderful idea, or you could just kind of go along with me. And here's a little picture of what my paper looked like. Again, it's pretty thoroughly annotated. I have some basic ideas over here on the left, and then I've written out some thesis statements over here, and maybe a topic sentence over here, and kind of some more ideas down here. Again, it's really up to you how you want to go about doing this. I've also made some annotations on the prompt, and we'll go over all of these specifically in the next few slides. So the first step in turning a prompt into an essay is going from your quote or your statement or your passage into an introduction paragraph minus the thesis. If you remember from the past video, the goal is to summarize in the first few sentences of your essay the issue or the topic that you are going to be arguing about. But now that we've covered kind of the logistics of the entire AP, what I first look at is this first little bit right here that is either the passage, a quote, or a statement. And it doesn't really matter which one it is. It's just nice to, I just kind of point it out because these are the three that you'll often see. So here I might go through and underline and bracket a few key pieces of information that I think I want to mention in my introduction. So moving from the quote to the introduction, you're going to want to include, like I said, some of that background information. So on my introduction might read, in his book Status Anxiety, writer Alain de Botton reminds readers that the primary purpose of humorists is to use comedy to relay potentially offensive yet important messages to society. And here I address the quote with my own integration of this background information into my own wording of an introduction. Next up, we have the prompt portion of the paper that you've received, and within the prompt, after you've gotten that background introductory information, you're going to be given a task, and that is the driving force of your thesis. So here we have the introduction. We have all this background information about Alain de Botton and the quote that we're going to be addressing. And then you ask yourself, what are you being asked to do? And that is the question that comes in on the second part of this prompt, and that is what I would call a task. And that's what's going to really drive your thesis and drive your argument. So this is the part that's going to ask you to do those two things that we talked about in the previous video. One is to take a stance, and two is to use specific evidence to back that assertion. So here I'm going to underline in purple the part about taking a stance. Remember those three things: defending, challenging, or qualifying. And then here in blue, it asks you to use specific and appropriate evidence to develop your position. So you know that you're going to be asked to think about the implications of Botton's view on the role of humorists, but you're taking your own information and putting that into an essay that reflects your own feelings about the subject. Here is what I'd say is a good time for the brainstorm. Here I have a nice little illustration of a brainstorm, and that is just anything that comes to mind that relates to the idea of humor serving a function in society. I might not even have my position decided yet. I don't even know if I agree, disagree, or qualify. I might just take some ideas, write them down, so I can survey my outside knowledge on this topic. Remember, these ideas can come from history, psychology, philosophy, other books that you've read, podcasts, current events, an anecdote that your friend told you that is relevant, a personal story. So here I've pulled up a blank page for us to brainstorm on. And right now I'm just thinking of things that come to mind when I think of humor as allowing people to say things that other people can't, humorists that I know, some satire, and anything that could border on dangerous, anything controversial. Really anything that relates to the topic. So the first thing that comes to mind is there was a series of Danish cartoons that I remember reading about that depicted the Prophet Muhammad and caused a big stir both in Danish Muslim communities and in the Middle East. So that is an example I thought of, maybe humor going too far. I love to watch the Colbert Report, and I know that Stephen Colbert, pt.2, Jon Stewart, they're all people who have political commentary on often controversial issues that people have accused them of walking the line between poignant remarks and critique and offensive. Next, I read an essay in AP Language and Composition called The Modest Proposal, in which the author proposes satirically to the Irish government, that they start putting babies up to eat. And it sparked some outrage, but it also got the writer a lot of attention because it was so outlandish. So I wrote that one down. Next, I put Fahrenheit 451 because I love the book and I always seem to find some way to get some meaning out of it that relates back to the prompt. That's the one that I always kept in my back pocket. I wrote down David Rakoff, who is a wonderful, wonderful essayist and humorist. He actually died a few years ago, sadly, but he was a very funny writer who dealt with some very serious issues. And I jotted down Animal Farm because that's a satire on that I had recently read. So here I have this broad spectrum of topics that I have to work with. They're not in any order. I don't have any thesis prepared. I don't have my argument yet. But with this list, I can survey my outside knowledge, like I mentioned, and kind of see where it's heading. What arguments can I make? So here we have all of our brainstorm topics. And now it's time to organize them, and the way I do that is sometimes I kind of lump them into categories so I know that I'm not being repetitive in my essay, so I actually can address different facets of the prompt. So here I might put I think I have 3 different categories that I can put all of my various brainstormed examples in. The first category I would use is probably a social critique or a political critique, and that is the category that Stephen Colbert, pt.2, and Jon Stewart would fit under. They're all media. They are TV shows that satirize politics and popular culture. Also, I would put Modest Proposal because that's also a social critique. Animal Farm maybe too. Next, I would say we have one nomination for the topic of self-expression as a use of humor, and under that I would put David Rakoff, and finally I would create a category for the Muhammad cartoon controversy, and that is danger, humor, crossing a line, and creating a sense of danger for those surrounding it. So now that I've created these 3 basic categories for examples, they can now develop into my 3 basic body paragraphs. I want to have 3 different topics to discuss in my essay. That's a basic structure, introduction, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion, and each of these examples is going to prove a different point. So I've chosen Stephen Colbert as my social critique example because I just knew his story best. I knew that example best in my mind, and that's often how you're going to pick examples. If you had a connection to the internet, you could probably find on Google a better example, but within your mind, you're going to have to do the best with what you have. Next, I only had one for self-expression. That was David Rakoff. And then third, the Muhammad controversy, cartoon controversy, will be my dangerous example. And now my job is to turn these 3 pieces of evidence that I have into an argument. And sometimes it's easier to write the argument first and then find examples. And sometimes, like I did in this paper, it was much easier for me to just write out all my examples and then figure out what arguments I could make from there. Now moving into my thesis, I say, while humor allows for effective critique of society/government and lends itself to a method of self-expression that a serious tone denies, it also has boundaries that, once crossed, are as dangerous as stating the point outright. Now, if we remember, our 3 categories are social critique, self-expression, and danger. I have now translated them into a while construction. The first part is my concession, and my second part is the assertion. And really this is going to be setting me up for my 3-body paragraph, and I'm going to improve all these points that there is a critique of society. I'll be talking about Stephen Colbert. For the self-expression, I'll be talking about David Rakoff. And then finally, I will prove the point that there is a boundary that Alain de Botton did not consider, or that his quote does not address. And that is where I'll bring up the Muhammad cartoon controversy. So I really just want to drive this point home again, that this thesis is going to be, whatever you want to call it. It's your guide, your roadmap, it's your game plan, it's your strategy. It's going to lead you down a path of analytical success and persuasive success. Anyway, it's just a reminder that everything comes back to the thesis, and so your paragraphs are all going to relate to this overarching argument. Because the first point in my thesis discusses societal and political critique, that is what my first paragraph is going to be on. And so I've chosen Stephen Colbert to talk about, and I'm going to go through each paragraph, just give you an idea of, I'll give the topic sentence and then some basic examples that I used and how I kind of tried to connect that to a larger meaning. So first, my topic sentence connects this part of the thesis, the critique of society, to my specific example, Stephen Colbert. A popular form of satire, political television shows, critiques society and policy more effectively than direct confrontation. I've made my argument. This is what my body paragraph is going to be arguing. And within that, I'm going to discuss a specific episode that I remember watching. So this TV episode I watched of Stephen Colbert involved him interviewing some person who supported banning evolution in the school district. And Colbert attacked it with this feigned earnesty, as I point out here, that was really much more effective than if he had just outright attacked this man's personal beliefs, because the man was very adamant about his beliefs. So when Colbert pretended to agree with him, not only did the man open up more and reveal more of his beliefs, but it also allowed for Stephen Colbert to show Colbert's point of view, that this man did not have a sound argument, and this satire was the only way that would really have worked to get this kind of perspective of this particular man and his views out in public. Whereas if this had been a liberal news station, the man probably would have become defensive or backed away, and he probably wouldn't have shared as much. And in this case, I argue that Colbert does a better job of getting this man to share his views, and that helps Colbert attack or at least to question this idea of banning evolution in schools. And so that would be my first paragraph. My second paragraph, as the thesis dictates, would be about self-expression. So my topic sentence reads, humor also allows artists to share intimate experiences without the morbidity or awkwardness that can accompany serious accounts. So I chose David Rakoff, one of my favorite writers, and he wrote oftentimes about these personal vicissitudes. He wrote about his dealing with his homosexuality and other people's reactions to that. He tells a hilarious story, and it was funny, but it was also touching and moving. And it made me realize, as I convey in this essay, that humor allowed David Rakoff to explore this idea of his homosexuality and really the cruel things people said to him with an air that invited an audience, and it allowed him to share his experience, not just tell it. He also went on later to deal with ultimately a fatal cancer, and the somber moments, which would have been very, very heavy on their own, were enriched by an infusion of witty and humorous comments about his own really depressing situation. And not only did it give hope to his stories, but it also allowed him to convey his emotions on a much deeper level. Humor supplemented the serious that occurred throughout his life and revealed that he maintained this positive perspective despite these hard times that he had to go through. It was ultimately, I argued, a more powerful argument. Finally, I've proven these 2 points, supposedly, about government critique and self-expression. So I've supported, to this point, de Botton's assertion, and now I kind of contradict it, because I realize that there's a nuance to his statement that he didn't really cover, and that's the fact that humor at some point can be just as dangerous as saying something directly. And I bring up this Muhammad cartoon controversy, and so I say, while satire can be conducive to revealing flaws in society and allow self-expression, notice these 2 parts are referring back to paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. That's something that's a nice way to kind of tie them together without doing that awkward concluding sentence that really is unnecessary. I say it also has potential to be equally as dangerous. I discuss this, I don't really know how to pronounce the name, but this Danish cartoon series in this newspaper, it depicted Muhammad, and it didn't just lead to threats to the artist and to the paper, but it led to violence and riots and threats and tension between governments. And so I consider in this last body paragraph the fact that humor may have a point at which it goes too far, and it has potentially fatal consequences, that people could die because of this, and at that point satire or humor, that is just as dangerous. And here I'm going to show you my conclusion. This is not a perfect conclusion by any means, but I want to show you that you don't have to have a perfect, finely tuned, polished essay to get a good grade. I say, ultimately humor is two-sided, with potential to be greatly constructive and expressive, but also presenting a fine line for humorists to walk between poignance and offense that can translate to danger. Here, I haven't really taken a huge step to create a larger meaning. It is not a perfect conclusion. And honestly, it's okay to not have a perfect essay, because that's not what the AP is looking for. What it's really looking for is that I've considered this prompt, I've considered the nuances and the implications of what the prompt is asking, and then I have constructed my own argument around that same issue that reveals my own critical thinking. It all comes back to this page, the fact that everything derives its meaning and its purpose from the thesis. It can create a much more organized and thoughtful essay because you have a point to refer back to, and something that always you can come to direct your arguments. And that is immensely helpful in a short period of time when you're struggling to make connections and argue persuasively. Having this clear and concise thesis is an incredibly helpful start, and that's why it's important to take your time when you're actually constructing the main argument. So just to review, we have our introduction, we have our 3 paragraphs that all come back to the thesis within this introduction paragraph, and then we have our conclusion. Sometimes you'll have 5 examples, and sometimes you'll have 2. It's really depends on the amount of time you give yourself to write, how quickly you know which examples you want to use, and understanding, can you go into enough depth, or is there enough there to talk about with each one of these examples. That's really it for the persuasive essay for AP Language and Composition. I hope this was helpful. I know that writing is a very, very personal experience, and it is kind of difficult to teach without interaction, but I hope that some of the tools are helpful in these videos, and that, you know, it's a matter of trial and error. If you pick up 10 things from this video, try them all out, and only one works, that would be a success. Again, the persuasive essay, this was the 2010 AP question 3 for the free response. If you want to look it up and look up, you can Google it, and they'll have sample essays there too. Keep an eye out for other videos if you're curious about either the persuasive essay, the analytical essay, or I'm going to be going into AP Lit in a little bit as well. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.